I'd like to call to order this regular meeting of the Lincoln Lancaster County Planning Commission of May 23rd, 2018. A printed agenda is available outside the hearing room, and a copy of the full agenda, including the staff reports, is available at the front of the chambers with the clerk. The Open Meetings Act is posted just inside the doors at the back of the room. If you parked in the parking garage across the street to the north, please be sure to pick up a parking coupon on your way out for free parking. And out of courtesy for those attending this meeting, the commissioners and the staff, cellular phone usage is not permitted in these chambers during any portion of this meeting. We will appreciate your cooperation. Please note that the Planning Commission action is final on the following agenda items. Item 1.2, the special permit number 18020, and item number 4.6B, special permit number 18019. Any aggrieved person may appeal final action of the Planning Commission to the City Council or County Board by filing a notice of appeal with the clerk within 14 days following the action of the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission action on all other items is a recommendation to the City Council or County Board. The first item of business is the approval of the minutes of the regular hearing held May 9th, 2018. Is there a motion?
So moved, Finnegan.
Second, Washington.
Please call. Yep.
Okay, Beckius,
Yes.
Edgerton,
Yes.
Finnegan,
Yes.
Harris,
Yes.
Hove,
Abstain.
Joy,
Yes.
Washington,
Yes.
Core,
Yes.
Shear.
Yes.
Motion carried 8-0.
The next item of business is the consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda will be called at the same time and will not be scheduled for a separate public hearing unless there is a request from someone wishing to speak or at the request of a commission member. I will ask Jerry to read all of the consent agenda items into the record, and once those items are read, she will ask if there is anyone wishing to speak. If you wish to speak on an item on the consent agenda, we would ask that you stand and state that item, and that item will then be removed from the consent agenda and scheduled as a separate public hearing under Section 3 of today's agenda. All items remaining on the consent agenda will be voted upon in total with a motion for approval. Jerry, will you please call the items on the consent agenda?
Yes. Item 1.1 is change of zone number 18012 from AG Agricultural District to P Public Use District for approximately 157 acres more or less on property generally located at 4100 North 84th Street. And the second item is item 1.2, special permit number 18020 to extend the allowed cellular tower height from 300 feet to 310 feet on property generally located at 450 West Whitstruck Road. I would note that this is final action on this special permit unless it's appealed to the City Council within 14 days. Are there any ex parte communications to be disclosed on these agenda items?
I see none.
Is there anyone here wishing to speak on either of these consent agenda items? If so, please stand and state that item.
I think we're ready to entertain a motion.
Move approval. Hove.
Second, Harris.
Please call the roll.
Moved and seconded. Beckius,
Yes.
Edgerton,
Yes.
Finnegan,
Yes.
Harris,
Yes.
Hove,
Yes.
Joy,
Yes.
Washington,
Yes.
Core,
Yes.
Shear.
Yes.
Motion carried 9-0.
I will now ask Jerry to call any requests for deferral received prior to this meeting.
Okay, we have received a request of the applicant for a 2-week deferral of the following associated applications. Change of zone number 18013 from AG Agricultural Residential to O3 Office Park District on property generally located at 8435 Firethorn Lane. And use permit 107F to expand the use permit by approximately 1.12 acres for an additional 13,400 square feet of commercial floor area on property legally or generally located at 8435 Firethorn Lane.
Entertain a motion?
Move to defer. Second, Edgerton.
Okay, moved and seconded.
Call-
Beckius,
Yes.
Edgerton,
Yes.
Finnegan,
Yes.
Harris,
Yes.
Hove,
Yes.
Joy,
Yes.
Washington,
Yes.
Core,
Yes.
Shear.
Yes.
Motion carried 9-0.
Is there anyone wishing to testify on this change of zone or use permit request rather than waiting until the June 6th hearing? I don't see any. So we will proceed to public hearings. The staff will make a brief presentation, and then the applicant will then be requested to present his or her testimony, followed by those who wish to testify in support, and then followed by those who wish to testify in opposition. The staff will then be given an opportunity to respond to the testimony, and then the applicant shall have an opportunity for rebuttal. Each person testifying should state their name and address and shall have 5 minutes to speak unless additional time is requested and granted. The timer will go off after 4 minutes. Then you will have 1 minute to wrap up your testimony. The Planning Commission will vote immediately at the close of the public hearing unless the commission votes to defer action or to continue the public hearing. Jerry, please call the first public hearing item.
Okay, item 4.1 is text amendment number 18006 to amend sections 27.06.180 and 27.62.150 of the Lincoln Municipal Code to allow outdoor vehicle storage as a conditional use in the I-1 Industrial District and repealing said sections as hitherto existing. Staff recommendation is for approval. Are there any ex parte communications to be disclosed?
I see none. Rachel?
Rachel Jones, Planning Staff. This proposal is a text amendment to allow outdoor vehicle storage in the I-1 zoning district. And currently, this use is conditionally permitted in the H3, H4, and I2 districts. And just for clarification, this is a different land use from vehicles that are for sale. This would be vehicles being stored as opposed to vehicles set out for sale. And an example of this would be RV storage. This is an exhibit that shows the location of the I-1 district throughout the city. And you can see that it is mostly located in the north and west parts of Lincoln. It is really our most permissive zoning district in that it allows a broad range of industrial and commercial uses. And so outdoor vehicle storage is an appropriate use to add there. It fits in with the character of the district. And then this is an exhibit showing our entryway corridors from the comprehensive plan. So comparing the two maps, you could see that I-1 zoning abuts several of our entryway corridors, primarily the Cornhusker Highway corridor. In terms of what we conceive of for our entryway corridors, the comprehensive plan encourages creating a positive visual impression for people entering the city along the corridors, with screening and landscaping to enhance them. And so for this proposed addition to the I-1 district, several conditions would apply, one of which is a screening requirement. So outdoor vehicle storage is required to be screened with a 60% screening from the ground to 10 feet. And this is an important consideration given that we try to enhance our entryway corridors as much as possible, and that would provide a decent screening for this use. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Questions?
Yes.
Maya?
If this is the most permissive zoning districts, is this just an oversight that it's not permitted, or was there an intent behind it?
You know, I'm not sure of the intent of why it was only conditionally allowed in those certain districts. That's something I can investigate and get back to you on. But
What was your hunch? Just didn't come up,
Um,
so it wasn't, is there any, can you think of any intent that somebody might have intentionally left it out?
Well, I think that, it's more of a commercial use than an industrial use, strictly speaking. So perhaps that is why it wasn't already allowed in the I-1 or I-3. I-3 is our employment center district, and so that use probably really wouldn't fit the character of I-3. But yeah, I couldn't speak to that offhand. So, some of these things have existed in our zoning ordinance for many decades, and it's not always clear why.
Other than RV storage, can you think of any other example?
Sure. So another example would be for a company that wants to store their pickup trucks or their large equipment on an area or a site. Another example of outdoor vehicle storage that's typically accessory is for car repair businesses. We'll have an area of outdoor vehicle storage for vehicles that are in process of being repaired or serviced, where they are parked, temporarily waiting for someone to pick them up or afterwards or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
One more question. The clarification of the parking, to your knowledge, will that make any business non-conforming where it has been interpreted differently in the past?
Not to my knowledge. The parking clarification should generally either for certain of the districts not change how we're applying parking today, or it should result in a lesser parking requirement in general. So it's probably not too likely that any uses will be made non-conforming on that piece.
Okay, thank you.
Dean?
Rachel, clarification, this was not staff initiated, it was initiated by one company?
That is correct. The applicant for this proposal initiated the request, and it is being supported by staff based on a site that was zoned I-1 that they wanted to operate this use in.
Any other questions? Thank you, Rachel. We'll take testimony from the applicant.
Hello, my name is Alex Busco. I'm the representative for the SIBS LLC, which is located at 720 East Norfolk Avenue in Norfolk, Nebraska. But they do have locations throughout the state of Nebraska and also in Denver, or in Colorado and Nevada. So the actions were requested for obviously the text amendment for the outdoor vehicle storage. The thought behind what we're going to do, or the land, is we have owned 2 plots of land there. So there's more. So the lot 2, so there's Superior Street. There's this lot that we're trying to get amended here, and then there's a lot right above it, which is where Aero Stage Lines, which is a motor coach company, they store vehicles. They have a large lot. They work on their vehicles and wash in the whole 9 yards. So this is the lot just south of that. We have had a lot of requests from people to park on our lot because it is a large lot that we park buses, which are similar to RVs, on. So the request was made from the owner of SIBS to look into doing an outdoor vehicle storage lot. In this lot, it's kind of a differently shaped thing, so it's hard to kind of build up if we were going to do more building for Aero Stage Lines. But this was decided that outdoor storage was something they'd want to pursue. So as she mentioned, the main idea behind it was to be storage for it would be RVs, so large RVs, so anywhere from, I guess it could be small RVs all the way up to no larger than 45-foot RVs. as well as outdoor storage for boats. I would not see, I guess we haven't talked much about it, but I don't know if I would see many small vehicle storage. This is meant as more of a large plot of land. It would be fully secured, so there is a fence around it now. It would still be fully secured with a automatic gate, full lighting, and then there would be an attendant there 24/7 that would help with security, and then there would be some subletted stuff that Aero Stage Lines, as in washing and dumping of the RVs, would do. So I wouldn't imagine there'd be too much in and out of the vehicles. Our thought behind it and would be that in our climate here, that most vehicles would come in towards the end of the warm season, as in their RVs and boats, and most would be used throughout spring, summer, and some of fall. So yeah, the thought behind it, it's 2.7 acres. We think we'd be able to fill that pretty well just with requests we've had, and then just marketing it pretty well. We don't think it'd be an ugly scene to drive by. It would be maintained very well, just get to the highest standards that the SIBS company uses. So yeah, we're just looking to provide a safe and secure place for outdoor vehicle storage, and we think this is a great place to do it. So,
Questions?
Why did you decide to offer a blanket change for the I-1 district instead of just changing to, say, like the I-2 district?
we just reached out. I'm not super familiar with how all that works, so the reason we reached out was we just have this little area we're wanting to do, and so the kind of the blanket change, I'm not sure why that was 100% amended, but.
Okay.
Other questions?
Do you have any concerns about the screening that the city would require to go with this?
Yeah, I don't, I guess, could I ask 100% what the screening would look like, that would happen? Or rate?
We can talk to the city about that
Okay.
afterward.
Okay, but.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Testimony in support of this item. Testimony in opposition of this item. I think we have staff questions.
Rachel, I'll ask you, so did staff suggest the blanket-wide change for the I-1 or instead versus going to just I-2 for this site, or can you kind of tell me some background?
Yes, when we first received the question, that was the first consideration we looked at, was whether a change of zone on the site was appropriate. In this case, it was really basically all surrounded by I-1, and I-1 was most appropriate. And so from that stage, we then looked at whether it would make sense to add it as a conditional use in the I-1, and found that it would be appropriate, and there was no reason not to support the change.
Okay.
And the screening has been explored with the applicant with regard to?
We haven't specifically talked about how they would implement their screening,
Okay.
no.
But that's the screening that's part of that zone, is that correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's the required screening
Okay.
for that use, which happens to be the same for any kind of outdoor storage.
Understood. Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, thank you. Applicant rebuttal. Anything else you want to say before we entertain a motion? Okay. So we're ready to entertain a motion.
Move approval.
Second, Becky's.
Discussion?
I'm kind of surprised it's not allowed already in the most permissive zoning district. Doesn't seem to be a clear reason why it wasn't allowed. It's conditional, so there's still some oversight, and it makes perfect sense.
Anybody else?
I just wanted to make sure, because when we do a blanket change like this, it affects the whole city, and so, I just wanted to make sure we were covering our bases and we didn't have any unintentional consequences, which sometimes happens. But since this is, you know, the most permissive zoning district, I think that we'll be fine on this one.
Yeah, I wrote myself a note too, that I think the big thing on something like this is the unintended consequences, and I don't really see any, so I'm going to support the motion. I think we're ready to vote.
Okay, this is for the approval of text amendment 18006. Beckius?
Yes.
Edgerton?
Yes.
Finnegan?
Yes.
Harris?
Yes.
Hove?
Yes.
Joy?
Yes.
Washington?
Yes.
Core?
Yes.
Shear.
Yes.
Motion carried 9-0. Next item is item 4.2, Comprehensive Plan Amendment 15005 to amend the 2040 Lincoln Lancaster County Comprehensive Plan to revise the future land use map, future trail route, and commercial center designations in the vicinity of South 40th Street and Yankee Hill Road. Staff recommendation is for approval. Are there any ex parte communications to be disclosed?
I see none. Rachel?
Rachel Jones, planning staff. This is a comprehensive plan amendment that is generally located south of Yankee Hill Road on either side of South 40th Street. And it relates to each of 3 PUD amendments that are on our agenda today for Wilderness Creek, Wilderness Commons, and Wilderness Heights. And so those PUDs are identified for your reference on this exhibit. We have Wilderness Creek to the north, on the west side of 40th Street. South of that is Wilderness Commons, and then on the east side of 40th is Wilderness Heights. Okay, so we have a variety of changes being proposed. The primary changes relate to future land use. To start off with, in Wilderness Heights, currently there's a commercial designation along 40th Street on the south side of the PUD, with residential shown along Yankee Hill Road. And so they are revising their plan to switch the two, partially related to the gas pipeline that's present in Yankee Hill Road and the policy to not locate residential within the gas pipeline planning area. And so instead, this area will be shown as commercial, with the area in red here going from commercial to residential for a multifamily area. The other change for Wilderness Heights is revising it from a neighborhood center, commercial center designation to a community center designation due to the larger amount of square footage they're proposing with their plan. So it fits more with the community center definition. And then on the west side for Wilderness Commons, currently Wilderness Commons is a primarily commercial development, and instead it's proposed to become primarily residential with a small area of commercial in the center. And so its land use is changing from commercial to residential in those areas, and its commercial center designation will be downgraded from a community center to a neighborhood center. And then there's a small area here that is being transferred from Wilderness Commons to Wilderness Creek PUD, and is going to be changing from a residential multifamily layout to a commercial site instead. Then we have several slight revisions to future land use throughout, just to match them to property lines and generally better match the proposals for the PUD amendments. And the last change is to revise the future trail route through this area. The line with the dots represents the existing trail layout, and then the stripe line is the proposed. And so it's basically revising the routes so that the drainage crossing on the south side of Wilderness Commons is further to the east. The reason for that is that the floodplain is narrower in that location, so it makes for a more feasible crossing for Parks Department. And then east of 40th, it's just simply being changed to more closely match the drainage way in the Grandale development where the trail is proposed to run there. Any questions you have, I'd be glad to take them.
Questions?
Can you show me, Rachel, on the map? So is it just that little section that's moving from Wilderness Commons to Wilderness Creek? Just that little,
Yes, that section is moving from one PUD to the other.
Rachel, will Parks and Rec be redoing the trail, or will the applicants be doing the trail realignment?
Well, this is a future trail, so it doesn't exist now. As far as who will construct the trail, I don't have those details, but they typically will work with the developer case by case to get the grading done beforehand and then come in at a later point and actually build the trail.
Okay.
Other questions? I don't see any. Thanks. We'll take testimony from the applicant.
Good afternoon. My name is Brad Marshall with Olson Associates, 601 P Street, Suite 200. So we have the map amendments here before you that are going to be basically attached to 4.3, 4.4, and 4.5 here. Rachel did a great job of kind of explaining what is happening here. Kind of rewind a little bit, some of this started with Wilderness Creek along Yankee Hill between approximately 33rd and 40th Street a couple of years ago, 2014, when we came forward with that amendment to change some of the commercial instead of residential along the corridor there. At the time, primarily because some of the adopted recommendations on the gas line. And so this is continuing to, as developments furthered along Wilderness Creek. We've got some car dealerships that have popped up in there. Roper and Sons, a mortuary, and so it's starting to fill out. So now we're getting down to some of the exterior areas where we have Wilderness Heights on the other side of 40th. Some of the same thought process was put forward as to what happened with Wilderness Creek, commercial along Yankee Hill where we have the high pressure gas lines. And then with the reassociation with some of the commercial on 40th Street, the Wilderness Commons development, which was a very heavy, intensive industrial employment center, commercial center. That's kind of got some thought about how that development will do in today's market, and with moving the commercial to Yankee Hill, downgraded the commercial and introduced more residential in those particular areas. So with that, I think we'll probably get into a lot of detail with site plans and developments themselves. I'll be happy to answer any other questions.
Questions?
I have a question. Is, in shifting all of this, the use around, it looks like commercial is going to be up on Yankee Hill, except for the node down 40th. But most of it's gonna move to residential.
Yep.
So if I have the idea, and I only have a question really about green space. So I see that there's an expansion of green space, I can applaud that, and, 99.9% of the time, but I'm curious if there's a connection.
So, back in 2006, when a lot of these developments were approved and so forth, this area has a tremendous amount of drainage coming through it. And so there actually are new regulations attached to those drainage ways. What was flood prone back then, or is floodplain. We have new regulations for minimum flood corridors, and even in the original annexation agreements, there were conservation easements. So all of those conservation were maintained. As far as those agreements were considered with Wilderness Commons, Wilderness Heights. And then, as with new regulation, we're adopting those as well. And so those are as far as green space, those are mainly being maintained in those corridors, so.
Okay, yeah, it's a little difficult to see with all of the new hatching boundaries that there is a connection across 40th Street.
Yep.
I just wanted to make certain that the expanse of green space, so where it is at Yankee Hill, it comes across 40th, and there's a continuity of green space to the green space on the west side.
Okay, other questions?
How many times can you use wilderness in a site?
It goes beyond this.
Can we please
I think
suggest something
I think
else
staff may
next
strike
time?
that from available names from here on out.
I think there's probably 5 or 6 more times they could probably use it if they try.
Anything else? Okay, thanks. We have testimony in support of this item. Do we have testimony in opposition of this item? Do we have any more staff questions? Do you want to have any rebuttal? Okay, I think we're ready to entertain a motion then.
Move approval, move conformance with comprehensive plan, core.
Second, Washington.
Discussion.
I think this is actually pretty straightforward, and I appreciate the developer recognizing and supporting that distance on the Yankee Hill road site for the pipeline planning area. I think that's important to observe, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think this is good planning, so I think we're ready to vote.
Okay, this is for the approval of comprehensive plan amendment number 15005. Beckius?
Yes.
Edgerton? Yes. Finnegan?
Yes.
Harris?
Yes.
Hove?
Yes.
Joy?
Yes.
Washington?
Yes.
Core?
Yes.
Shear.
Yes.
Motion carried 9-0. Next item is item 4.3, change of zone number 15016A, amending the Wilderness Creek planned unit development from R5 PUD to R3 PUD and from B2 PUD to R5 PUD, and amending the overall boundary of the PUD for approval of the development plan that proposes modifications to the zoning ordinance, subdivision ordinance, and design standards on property generally located at South 33rd Street to South 40th Street, Yankee Hill Road to 1/2 mile south of Yankee Hill Road. Staff recommendation is conditional approval. Are there any ex parte communications to be disclosed on this item?
I see none. Jesse?
Thank you, Commissioners. Dusty Redmond, Planning Staff. As Rachel explained, the previous item and the next 3 items are related, but they are separate applications, but there is some overlap in property owners and details like that. So this is the Wilderness Creek PUD. Yankee Hill Road runs here and South 40th here. So we're talking about this area located here. And so this is an amendment to an existing PUD that was originally approved in 2015. This amendment does include an increase to the boundary. So this 20 acres here that Rachel had referenced earlier was originally in Commons and is being proposed to move into Wilderness Creek. So the request is for an amendment for up to 300 multifamily dwelling units 247 square feet of commercial square space. Basically, also to swap what is approved now, multifamily in the southwest corner with some single family. So instead of multifamily here, the applicant is proposing single family. And also a waiver to increase building height from 35 feet to 55 feet in the R5 PUD area, so only for this section here. As you are aware, our comp plan does encourage a mix of office and commercial and residential uses. There's also the pipeline planning area that extends along Yankee Hill Road. The city does not encourage any sort of residential development in there, and this proposal includes adequate spacing along the gas pipeline area. And overall, the density that is being proposed fits with the urban density residential future land use designation of our comp plan. And then just to touch a little bit on the waiver. Again, the only portion that the waiver applies to is the R5. This is supportable for multifamily to allow the increase of density for flexibility of site design. Additionally, because South 40th Street is a minor arterial, it's an appropriate location for a higher density for taller residential buildings. So with that, I'll take any questions you all may have.
I just have a couple clarifications real
Sure.
quick. So, really the portion that we're adding is just that portion south of Hohensee Drive, that R5 section there, and then I guess that other section's R3 there.
Yes, ma'am. So this section here is going from Commons to Creek, and it's approximately 20 acres.
And that's the only section that's gonna have the increased height.
Yes, the R5.
And so right now, I mean, I can see some lots mapped out on there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming that that would be the only thing that's built right now, if that is even built.
It's not currently built, no.
Okay, so there's no existing buildings there right now.
Not that I'm aware of.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I do.
Sandra? And then Maya?
It has to do with the height. Now, this is an easier proposal to consider, as opposed to the last hearing, because there's no neighbors yet. So no one's being impinged upon by this increased height, but I am curious why. Why is there, I mean, I want to understand the motivation behind that. I'll ask the applicant as well. But I'm interested in how this sits topographically, because I'd like to know what the neighboring use will be. If it's single family, as I understand the last proposal, or it's R3, I guess. But I'd like to, so south, I'm going into Commons?
To Commons, yeah.
Okay. So- You understand, Wilderness B. Anyway, so I'm coming into the Commons area, and I'd like to know what's going to come up against that R5.
So there's kind of the general conception here that multifamily will actually be grouped together. Originally, the proposal included, and sorry for all my papers, I'm just trying to make sure I can explain this well. So the original, what's currently proposed or is approved, is multifamily here. So basically, we're swapping this multifamily to be over here, which is where the multifamily for Commons is kind of proposed to be. So we're condensing that high density of multifamily uses. And so I think you had mentioned that single family down to the south, that actually what's being proposed is more multifamily down to the south.
But when the multifamily was north and to the west, it wasn't looking for a waiver to 55.
Currently, yes, I believe so. And so I think maybe the applicant could speak to how the market's changed and why, we're seeing this request for the height waiver more often because of this of more apartments are being requested to be lived in versus maybe what was approved a few years ago, is that sort of market has increased on demand. But I would again let the developer speak to that.
Okay. I'm curious about staff reaction to this. You've been very supportive of height waivers, and I'm curious what the thinking is with the staff about increasing height above what we've allowed typically.
Sure. So in an appropriate location like this, our comprehensive plan does state along a arterial street is an appropriate place for higher density. For example, the project that we heard a few weeks ago, there were 2 arterial streets, but this has a single arterial street. And so our comprehensive plan kind of, lends to being able to encourage this higher density where there's appropriate infrastructure planned and where the uses are kind of grouped and then they buffer out, similar to how these PUDs are being designed.
I was just curious about the roundabout. So it says that the impact fees will go towards potentially building a roundabout at South 40th and Wilderness Hills. What would trigger that roundabout?
So, so these are already approved PUDs, and so there are already existing annexation agreements where all of these details about how this infrastructure is funded, and I personally don't understand all of those details. It gets very intricate, and so any specifics on that, I would ask for Steve to come up and explain those.
I'm just curious about the timeline, whatever critical mass would have to be reached to get a roundabout there.
Sure.
Steve Hendrickson of the Planning Department will answer that in Wilderness Commons. So this one is still Wilderness Creek.
Okay.
And that is both Wilderness Commons and Wilderness Heights have that question, and that is part of the motion to amend.
All right,
Anything else?
hold my questions.
Yeah, I guess so. Anything else?
Desi, staff had reported, Watershed had reported some issues with the floodplain and perhaps grading that has occurred. Could you speak to that?
I can speak partially to that. There have been some back and forth between the applicant and the Watershed Management Department regarding details of how those are getting flushed out. I would let you know that we have been in constant contact with the Watershed Management Department, and we put a condition of approval that all of their comments must be addressed before even moving on to City Council. But any sort of specific details, I would defer either to the applicant to explain any grading that has already been done in the floodplain, or watershed management as well.
Okay, thank you.
Desi, I understand that this is one of the areas where you're flipping the designation between the community center and the neighborhood center. Is that correct, with the Wilderness Heights area? Is that correct?
Let's see, the Wilderness Heights area, that's not my project, and so I just might defer to Rachel to answer how.
I guess my question is that in the, let me see if I can find it here. When we're talking about the quotes from the comprehensive plan, there's some discussion about community centers, and then it kind of flips into commercial centers. And to be honest, I was having a hard time figuring out which was which and which was relevant to what we're flipping between the two areas, and just wanted some clarification on that.
Okay, sure. So, okay, the reason behind the flip is because how much commercial square footage, what is approved versus was approved. And so in Wilderness Creek, 300 multifamily units are being proposed, and the original include 400 dwelling units total. What's being proposed now is 247 square feet of commercial, with original 200 So there's not a huge difference there.
Okay.
But with Wilderness Commons, where it's proposed to go to a commercial center, to a neighborhood center, there was an original 600 square feet of commercial space that's approved, and it's going down to 83,000 square feet. So the amount that is being requested is decreasing significantly, which changes it from a commercial center to a neighborhood center.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Anything else? I don't see anything. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll take testimony from the applicant.
Brad Marshall with Olson Associates. So Wilderness Creek, a lot of the questions are very good. You're going to make my job pretty easy here. I think you flushed out a lot of the things to talk about. Primarily, I've got the map here. I think, again, staff has done a great job talking about some of the changes that are proposed within the PUD. This area that we've been talking about with the apartments and office type uses, I should first say that I'm here on behalf of Lincoln Federal Bancorp, which is the owner of this property. One of the reasons for the flip-flop between Commons and Creek is primarily ownership. The Commons parcels are tenants in common. There's a partnership there, and Wilderness Creek is just Lincoln Federal Bancorp. And so Lincoln Federal Bancorp owns these lots highlighted around in pink, and so that's being brought into Wilderness Creek, so that a little consistency between owners. And as you can imagine, as agreements are put together with annexation and so forth, it's a little messy, so we're trying to simplify it.
Okay, so you just confused me more.
Okay.
Are you saying that on Wilderness Creek, the bank already owns that?
Yes.
And they're adding the pink section because they own that too?
They brought that over from
Thank you.
Commons, yes. And so as Commons was approved back in 2006, it was approved without a site plan or grading plan. And this time we are implementing a specific site plan with the apartments and the office type use. I'll clarify a little bit. I mean, all of the periphery along Yankee Hill and down along 40th Street is an H3, and so they are changing that from an O3 or O2 to an H3 with this changed into Wilderness Creek, and then the R5 designation for the apartments. So with the apartments, we are asking for the height waiver. One thought is that and we are asking for that waiver in Wilderness Commons as well. There is some green space with the drainage ways between. There's about 150 feet between the west side, which we'll get into Wilderness Hills, and any type of residential lots. I'll put this up here. Maybe I can get in a little bit tighter. So this is a little outdated, just because I don't have the apartments sitting here. But as you can see on the other side of the creek, we have single-family lots that would be on the west side. But we believe that with the additional height from 35 to 55, and primarily the market point for what we're thinking would go here is very similar to what we did in Wilderness Hills Commercial, another wilderness. And so we asked for a height waiver there, it was granted. The market with some of these apartment buildings, you have parking in the first floor, so you don't have a full story of units in those type of apartment buildings. And so additional story is usually added to those type of apartment buildings. And just with the higher ceiling heights and so forth, this has been a very common request that we've done in a higher density area. Then I'll just touch upon really quickly the other area that we have made the change where it was multifamily, and it is shown as all single family attached and detached. Townhome type of units are probably going to be are proposed a little bit smaller, adjacent to the H3 zoning to the north, and then single family would be very consistent with what you see in Wilderness Hills with the R3 zoning. Drainage, Tom. You asked a question about that. I'll tell you, we have been working on something that was adopted in 2006, and 13 years later, fast forward, 2009, FEMA floodplain was adopted. So we're bringing all of these developments up into regulation. So there have been, there's been a lot of communication. That's one reason, I should say the primary reason, to be honest, why all three of these are coming forward at one time. The drainage ways and fingers are all reaching into these developments. They're one hydraulic model that is being sent over to Watershed, and we're working with them. And so some grading did transpire about a year or two ago. Trying to think what map would probably be the best piece. But there is a corner here that the conservation easement pops into a corner, and we suspect that even though we showed grading along the kind of the peninsula there, the grading contract cut the corner and filled into the area. So at this time, we have submitted a floodplain development permit to actually remove that fill from that particular area, and so that is pending. And as soon as that is approved, that fill will be taken out.
Thank you.
Yes.
What's the setback in R5
For the
for the tall building that would be 55 feet high?
you're putting me on the spot, and I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer to that, to be honest.
Brad, come on.
Brad, does the 55-foot building height, does that include the underground parking as part of that height?
It does. I guess I would say if it's underground, and I should probably clarify my comment, there are apartment complexes with underground, which I would call kind of in the basement, and then there are first level parking garages. Either or, I suppose that we would probably see something here. The underground is not, I should back up, probably not going to happen here, primarily because we are held to a minimum floor elevation for the apartments, for any dwelling units that are adjacent to floodplain. So when I was describing the vehicles in the garages, it would actually be a first level entry. So kind of called pedestal buildings, where you drive in the first level and then you walk up to your residences on the second or third or possibly fourth stories.
Anything else?
Brad, could you remind me of the improvements that are currently on the site today? Car dealerships, ropers, is that pretty much it, and various street improvements and infrastructure improvements?
Yes. So the Baxter dealerships are a lot, on these two lots. Roper and Sons is in the corner right off of Ohensi. And then the streets and utilities are all ready for some single-family attached.
But nothing built there in terms of a living structure yet?
No living structures. And as far as I know, those have just kind of got to market, and so those are entering purchase agreements right now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And Brad, you said we had given you a waiver previously on another development for 55
Yes.
feet? Yeah.
So that would actually be right up the road, kind of, to the west, right here.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? Thanks, Brad.
Thank you.
Is there any testimony in support of this item? Testimony in opposition of this item? Do we have additional staff questions?
What's the setback? Would you know the setback in R5?
I do not know that off the top of my head either, but we could probably look it up for you.
Steve's got it.
So in the R5, the height limit is 35 feet, and the setback, if it was a rear yard, would probably, in a case like this, be 30 feet. If there was a side yard setback, it would be 10 feet if the building was over 20 feet tall.
And how does it work when if you approve a waiver Does that mean that by sort of, I'm saying by right and I'm using it wrongly, but, you know, does that mean that you could, you use that existing setback and that would immediately be allowed, or would that still have conditional?
So unless some additional setback was placed on the property, you would just follow the R5 setbacks.
Okay.
In this case, it's a triangular shaped lot in Wilderness Creek. To the north is Wilderness Hills Boulevard, Hohensie Drive, so you have a wide right-of-way there, so you don't really need any additional setback. And on the other two sides are drainage ways. So both of those drainage ways add 50 to 80 feet of setback. So we didn't see any reason to have anything additional in terms of setback because you've added 50 to 80 feet. And in one direction, it's more apartments. In the other direction, it's single family, but you'll effectively have a 80 or 90 foot setback by the time you get through the drainage way.
Got it.
And the drainage way is protected in this case.
Okay, that's helpful.
Can I ask a clarifying question? You said a front yard setback is 30, or a rear yard setback is 30 and the sides are 10? Are those two pieces of the triangle rear or side?
Excellent question, and it really kind of depends on how we ultimately just finish off the lot. Is there a small piece in between that's actually going to be the rear and they're both are going to be sides, or is it going to be a true triangle? I would guess they're probably going to end up both being sides. That there'll be some line in between the two that'll serve as the rear, because the rear is the one that's most directly opposite the front.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Staff? Okay. Brad, you want to say anything else? You good? Okay. I think we're ready to entertain a motion.
Move approval, Beckius.
Second, Finnegan.
Discussion?
I think it's a nice layout that has taken, I think, all concerns into consideration, and I think the height waiver is supportable, largely due to the fact that the impact here will not be so great. Everyone coming into the development from a residential standpoint will at least be aware that the height waiver exists, or reasonably can ascertain that the height waiver exists. So I'll support the project.
Anything else? Any other discussion?
Ditto.
Yeah, ditto, I agree.
Yep,
Okay, I think we're ready for vote.
Okay, this is for the conditional approval of changes zone 15016A. Beckius?
Yes.
Edgerton?
Yes.
Finnegan?
Yes.
Harris?
Yes.
Hove?
Yes.
Joy?
Yes.
Washington?
Yes.
Core?
Yes.
Shear.
Yes.
Motion carried 9-0. Next item is item 4.4, changes zone number 06075A, amending the Wilderness Commons planned unit development for changes of zone from B2 PUD to R3 PUD and from B2 PUD to R5 PUD, and amending the overall boundary of the PUD for approval of a development plan that proposes modifications to the zoning ordinance, subdivision ordinance, and design standards to allow for up to approximately 501 dwelling units and 83,600 square feet of office and commercial floor area on property generally located west of South 40th Street and Wilderness Hills Boulevard. Staff recommendation is for conditional approval. Are there any ex parte communications to be disclosed?
I see none.
Thank you, Commissioners. Dusty Redmond, Planning Staff. So this is an amendment to the Wilderness Commons PUD. Just to orient you again once to the site, Yankee Hill Road, South 40th Street, and Wilderness Commons is located here. So this was originally approved in 2008, and so the applicant is requesting an amendment to the existing PUD to decrease, and also to decrease the boundary. Again, taking that approximate 20 acres and moving it out of Commons and into Creek. So this is for a total of up to 401 dwelling units, which would include 67 single-family detached, 34 single-family attached, and 300 multifamily. And also for 83,600 square feet of office and commercial space. And then just as a reminder, there was a memo that was sent out that included the revisions to the staff report, specifically to the conditions of approval. And as stated previously, our comp plan does encourage this type of mixed use, including office, commercial, and residential, and aligns with the designation of the land use pending approval of what the comprehensive plan amendment that you all just approved. There are rate waivers being requested for this site as well. First waiver is a minimum private roadway width going from 27 feet to 24 feet on South 39th Street, just north of Wilderness Hills Boulevard. And after discussion with Public Works, they do require a 25 feet minimum, and so that will be required to be 25 feet, and no parking signs would also be required to be posted. The second waiver is the centerline tangent length from a horizontal curve to an intersection street at South 39th Street and Prairie Wind Road, which is to the south of the property here. And this is a reasonable request, as it has also been reviewed by the Public Works Public Works Department. The third waiver is a minimum public roadway width from 33 feet to the configuration as shown on the site plan. And basically, the idea behind this waiver is to create a pedestrian-oriented commercial area along the Wilderness Hills Boulevard, where there is perpendicular parking proposed. So staff does agree that this would be an acceptable waiver, provided that the commercial buildings would be oriented to Wilderness Hills Boulevard, and that the private parking would be in the rear behind those buildings, and that the on-street parking that is being proposed would be privately maintained, so the city wouldn't have to maintain that parking. And the fourth waiver that is being requested is an increase in building height from 40 feet to 55 feet for just the multifamily portion of the project. There were additional waivers requested, but after staff reviewed them, it was determined that they actually do meet city standards, and so they're no longer applicable. And then I'll take any questions if you have some. Thank you.
Just so I understand the first waiver, so are you denying their request for a waiver, or have they agreed to the 25 feet?
No, we're not denying it. We're just saying that in order for that to be approved, you'd have to meet the 25 feet. The 25 feet, we wouldn't allow the 24 feet.
But the applicant is no longer requesting 24 feet.
It would be a condition of approval, so in order to get approved, you'd have to meet that 25 feet.
Okay, and then you said about on the third one, you talked about the parking being oriented towards the neighborhood. Do you mean kind of Whole Foods style? Is that kind of like?
Well, okay, so.
Picture of it in my mind.
Yeah, let me see if I can zoom in here. So the applicant's proposing perpendicular parking along here. And so I guess the parking, sorry if I misspoke, the parking isn't oriented towards the commercial buildings. The buildings would be oriented towards the road. So I guess it's kind of two in the same. But so the private parking would be in the rear of the building, and these commercial buildings would be pushed up to the road here.
So kind of
There's
more
no
like
parking
a,
out in front of the building, or is
Yeah,
there?
right.
There's perpendicular.
so kind of like a Fallbrook situation.
Yes, similar to Fallbrook. Yeah, because they have the parking on the rear of the buildings as well. But yeah, so the perpendicular parking, which is actually public parking, would be pushed up to the buildings. But essentially, there'd be no parking in between the building and the perpendicular parking.
creating kind of a Main Street effect.
Exactly. That is the idea behind it, is to create a little bit more of a pedestrian-oriented design.
Now, will that continue down, I'm not sure what road that is. Is that considered South 39th or?
So this is Wilderness Hills, and South 39th Street runs here.
I can't see your pen. but
Yeah,
where
we
was
couldn't see where
39th?
you were pointing there.
Zoom back out. South 39th Street runs here. And so it's actually private and turns into a public.
The little curvy part, that's not 39th Street?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It's private. It's a private 39th Street.
And so where, if you could zoom in on the commercial buildings there on 39th. So it looks like there's a commercial building backing onto 40th and facing a parking lot that is along 39th?
Yeah, are you referring to these two buildings?
Yeah, buildings 11 and 12.
Yes.
And 13 is somewhere in between that little one, yeah. It's facing the private parking.
Yeah, so it looks like it would be on the corner
Okay,
of
all right.
these two roadways.
So it still has perpendicular parking,
You're right.
and that would be maintained privately? That,
Yes, this
Okay.
parking back here would be maintained privately.
along 39th Street, where it's a private street on the curve, that's also maintained privately?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Okay. Thank you. We have testimony from the applicant.
Hello, Brad Marshall with All Associates again. So here I am here on behalf of the tenants in common for Wilderness Commons. Brett West is here, able to answer any questions from the ownership side if it's needed at all. So, yeah, the existing PUD that's in place for this is, you know, the large commercial center, and some of the thought here was that this is such an employment center and commercial wasn't going to be supported on 40th, so we started developing concept plans where commercial to be implemented into this site and along the corridor. And I don't want to make a direct correlation to Wilderness Hills commercial, but like where Tanner's is on 30th Street entering, that's kind of some of the thought that we had included, is where that is you have parking along the roadway and coming in. And to even go a little bit further on that, some of the design standards that were developed for Wilderness Hills commercial has been then probably not as stringent as I suppose I would call it, has been utilized in Wilderness Heights and Wilderness Commons here. So we've added that to the plan notes. You know, so much brick and so much some of the look of the architectural features of the buildings have been implemented, and we want to continue that through this development. The apartment complex is about 300 units on the north side there, about 80,000 square feet of commercial. And I should have mentioned, even the last one, we did have a neighborhood meeting on April 4th where we had about a dozen people show up. We did include all of the developments. There's not a lot of houses around here, so we threw all the developments and had about a dozen people attend. A lot of that I can speak to was more along Wilderness Heights across 40th Street, where we have acreages abutting to. Really no concerns here for Wilderness Commons. Again, the residential development is really confined by the open spaces, drainage ways. There'll be a trail network that is extended from Yankee Hill. The Cabot Trail will someday extend down here, where there was some discussion about whose responsibility is. The developer actually provides the corridor and an area for that grading work to commence, and then Parks and Rec will actually contract and construct those trails. This one's a little unique. The developers had some preferences where the trail went, and then we'll pay for one of the crossings because they had pushed one of the crossings and added a crossing. So as part of the current annexation agreement, or actually it's a part of the conservation agreement in this particular area, they are obligated to pay a portion and construct that crossing, which is actually right down here. Try to develop a plan that was pedestrian oriented and friendly to connect to the trails and through the commercial areas, even the multifamily area where you have corridors from one end to the other to come down. And so with that, if you have any questions, please.
Are you guys okay with, I think you had originally requested 23 feet. Are you okay with the 25 feet?
Yes. One of the conditions already kind of marked on here where this roadway comes down, one of the design standards is the public roadway shouldn't lead right into like a driveway or differentiating from public to private. So one of the conditions was that it actually stops at this roadway, and that is fine. Is my understanding then, there may not be the residential units abutting beyond that that's not public, and so the private roadway extends, or private driveway would call it, where there's parking. There may be an opportunity to extend some of the parking and or office area into that area.
Other questions? Thank you. Until next time. Do we have testimony and support?
I'm Brett West with Assurity, so I'm one of the applicants, I guess, speaking in behalf. So if you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer that. But really what we're trying to do here is utilize the density to the north and then get some area which we'll be going through, and I'm going to maybe answer some of the 40th Street roundabout question that you might have. So the idea here is Wilderness Hills is doing very well, or the Hills, maybe we'll call them. The Hills is doing very well. Our apartment project is underway, and so this is our next viable option. It's the same ownership group that's at Hills that is looking at now developing down here, and commercial just did not make sense. I mean, trying to get commercial down the 40th Street corridor was not going to happen, so we engaged with design firms, and then myself being a recovering architect got involved, and so we feel like this will be an actual viable plan that we can get done in a reasonable amount of time. So thus the change. We appreciate your review. So,
Questions for Brett? I don't see any. Thanks. Any other testimony and support? Is there testimony in opposition? Do we have staff questions? Okay. Brad, would you like to say anything else at this point?
I will, because I think I forgot one thing, and there was a question about the roundabouts, which I think we're here and we can talk about now. So there's a lot of history with this, and so I'll try to keep it simple. There was a 40th Street agreement as part of Wilderness Commons and Wilderness Heights that is being completely revamped, if you will. 40th Street will become a city project one day. It's a rural section 2-lane asphalt road today as it is, and so one of the conditions the staff has proposed, when a connection is made to 40th Street, or the development wants to make a connection to 40th Street, apart from, I believe, residential, I think that's the way it was written, if there was a connection to the west that there could be an exit. There's not today, but if that did exist at some point and some residential wanted to develop in an R3 area, I think they could utilize that to a certain extent. But the discussion has really been about the roundabout at Wilderness Hills Boulevard. And so when the developer moves forward with work here, that some type of connection and intersection improvements would take place. The discussion right now is that it would be some type of roundabout. The proposal that's kind of going through the annexation agreement right now does propose still temporary improvements if that's, the agreement's still between two parties on the west side and the east side. If there was not an agreement to move forward with the full permanent roundabout, there's still temporary, but I believe that all parties would like to see the permanent roundabout built here. And so, if the connection was made, the roadway was built, a permanent roundabout would be put in place. One of the attendees to our neighborhood meeting was somebody from the church that is on the east side. I've had since some correspondence with them how that may impact them. There's a huge roundabout going to be implemented at their main entranceway. And so we've communicated some of their concerns to Public Works, just with the closings and so forth. They generate a lot of traffic on Sundays and holidays, if you will. They have large amounts. So this is probably a project, even if it was the big 40th Street roadway project, it would be phased. They do have secondary access at Prairie Wind, which is on the south side. Prairie Wind is left out of the discussion right now for any type of improvements. The idea being that if a connection, basically the development will wait for the 40th Street improvements to take place before any secondary connection to 40th Street would take place. Thinking that there would be a connection at Wilderness Hills and then one to the west through Wilderness Hills, the development over there. So it's not as straightforward, but I mean, the idea is that the work would take place. The developers would actually trigger that if they were to move forward. So.
Okay. I believe we're ready to entertain a motion. And remember that there's a revised staff report that needs to get included somehow into that motion, I believe.
Move approval as amended.
Second, Washington?
Is there discussion?
Once again, a nice layout. I think a nice integration between office, potential usage, the multifamily with the height waiver once again. Coming from ground zero, height waivers in place. I like the fact that the existing or the potential neighbors know that that height waiver should potentially be able to ascertain that that height waiver exists. And I think this does a nice job of integrating those residential uses along with a Main Street sort of feel and gives a nice option for people that want to live in communities built like that.
Mm-hmm. Others? And I think this is a good opportunity to pay attention to changing market conditions and responding to the market and
Yes.
doing something that can be done, can be completed. So I'll support the motion.
Okay, this is for conditional approval of change of zone number 06075A as per the conditions of the revised staff report. Beckius?
Yes.
Edgerton?
Yes.
Finnegan?
Yes.
Harris?
Yes.
Hove?
Yes.
Joy?
Yes.
Washington?
Yes.
Core?
Yes.
Shear?
Yes.
Motion carried 9-0. Next item is item 4.5, change of zone number 07060B, amending the Wilderness Heights planned unit development for changes of zone from B2 PUD to O3 PUD, B2 PUD to B2 PUD, R3 to B2 PUD, R3 to R3 PUD, R3 to R5 PUD, and B2 PUD to R5 PUD for approval of a development plan that proposes modifications to the zoning ordinance, subdivision ordinance, and design standards to allow up to approximately 1,189 dwelling units and 300,000 square feet of office and commercial floor area on property generally located at South 40th Street and Yankee Hill Road. Staff recommendation is for conditional approval. Are there any ex parte communications to be disclosed?
I see none.
Rachel Jones, planning staff. We are now considering our third PUD amendment, which is the Wilderness Heights PUD, shown on this exhibit with Yankee Hill Road located here and South 40th Street. And this amendment, to begin with, is an expansion of the PUD boundary. Currently, the Wilderness Heights PUD only includes this area, along 40th Street, and the remainder is in the Wilderness Heights preliminary plat, so this would expand the PUD to cover the whole thing. And then along with that, a revised site plan. In the northwest corner is an office area. Again, commercial being relocated up along Yankee Hill Road. Multifamily on the west side adjacent to 40th Street, and the remainder shown as single family. We also have a neighborhood park in the southeast corner that will serve just generally this square mile. On the plan, they are showing 167 single-family lots, up to 300 multifamily units, and 300,000 total square feet of commercial and office space. Due to the large amount of square footage here, we are requiring that a minimum 50,000 square feet must remain in office uses, and that is just to preserve the mix of office and commercial so that it doesn't become overwhelmed with commercial. Unless the developer were to develop South 44th Street with more of a town center, pedestrian-oriented layout, that would basically better justify the extra retail and restaurant square footage. There are currently building design criteria that apply in Wilderness Heights, and they would be continued to apply to all office and commercial lots here. There are also a number of waivers requested, particularly an increase in building height to 55 feet for the R5 multifamily area, as well as the B2 commercial area. We are also have waivers to allow the following two uses in the B2 area, which are motorized vehicle sales and service, and dwellings on the ground floor. And those are in the B2 area again. And so one of the conditions discusses that the unassigned units in the multifamily area should be allowed to be constructed in the B2 area, just to preserve flexibility in case there's not as much demand for commercial in the future, and to encourage potential for more mixed-use buildings there. We also had a motion to amend the staff report with this. Just adding a note to the PUD, essentially setting out the phasing and timing of the multifamily area relative to limiting its
A little bit,
access.
please. You just zoom in
Oh,
a little bit.
yes, sorry.
Thanks.
Which limits the number of units, as long as it would only be taking access to Hohensee Drive, and then refers to additional units on the south side of the multifamily site that could be then constructed once the roundabout is built at Wilderness Hills Boulevard. Glad to take any questions you have.
Questions? Tom?
Rachel, are we looking at fully signalized intersections on Yankee Hill at, I don't know what it is, 44th and, is it 48th?
On that question, I will need to defer it to either Steve or Public Works. But those details are being set out and worked out in the annexation agreement.
I have a question while
Yeah.
they gather up. What is the reason why residential on the first floor is not allowed?
Residential on the first floor is not allowed by right in B2, just because B2 is a commercial district, and so the intent has been to preserve kind of the first floor is commercial and then residential above, so that you don't get, I guess, an overabundance of residential taking over what should be a commercial district primarily. But, we have had amendments like this in the past. I know with Wilderness Hills Commercial over near 33rd and Yankee Hill Road, with that multifamily that was approved recently, that was an amendment to allow ground floor residential.
So is it
in that B2 PUD.
So it's mainly a consideration for the commercial to not interrupt the flow or negatively impact. It's not necessarily protecting residential from the impacts of commercial.
No, I don't.
The reason you don't have it on the first floor.
Right. I think you're right. The intent is to preserve that, pedestrian-oriented ground floor with storefronts and retail space. But we wouldn't want, also encouraging mixed-use buildings where residential could be located above.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Did you want to get back to the signal? Who had that question? Was that Tom? Yeah.
Bob Simmering, Public Works. The traffic study done at this site did not indicate that the traffic volumes would warrant signals here. However, there is the condition that if it ever would warrant those, they could go up. But at this point, we don't anticipate that.
Okay, thanks. Okay. Do we have testimony from the applicant?
Well, this is the last time you have to see me.
I don't know, you have
Brad-
rebuttal.
You could. Brad Marshall with Olson Associates. So, again, this is an existing permit that's in place. It originally was a use permit on the west side. I've kind of highlighted yellow, zooming here, and then the rest of it was a residential neighborhood. That went all the way up to Yankee Hill, and with the, again, the the planning area there. We've reassociated the commercial, and that's really kind of started. We started with a plan with the commercial along Yankee Hill, and we tried to maintain a lot of the preliminary plat, roadway networks, and so forth. We did change, alignments and so forth, but primarily that's was tried to stay in place. The multifamily use that we've got along 40th Street with the height waivers, that ground actually sits quite a bit lower than the residential to the east, probably pretty significantly. Directly, we're looking at some of the elevation kind of cross sections through here, and they're 20 plus feet that would be up there. There may be some changes that we try to soften that a little bit, but that's kind of the way it sits right now. This development is actually under construction. Under that existing use permit, there's a complete children's health that sits right off the northeast corner of 40th and Hohensie. We did implement those design standards that I talked about that's being proposed in Wilderness Commons. Those were actually taken from over here in Wilderness Heights that we had approved under that use permit. We did have the neighborhood meeting, and we do have acreages to the east where there was pretty good attendance from the acreage owners over there, primarily just wanting to know what's going to happen adjacent to their property. But there were comments about the drainage, which is pretty typical, how that may affect their property and connectivity and so forth. And I showed them there is connectivity to the developments where probably appropriate, where we can, on a common spacing as required by planning and standards. And then they understood most of that. One guy wanted to know about his orchard that he's got 200 or 300 trees over there, and how that may affect him because he has to spray his trees and so forth. It never had gotten that question before, but we did follow up with it, and we did contact Health and Human Services, the department there, and ask those questions. Primarily, it's his responsibility to follow basically the manufacturer recommendations for implementing chemicals and spraying chemicals. So it's like farming. So, you don't do it on a day that's blowing 40 miles per hour, so you don't implement health hazards to adjacent property owners. But they were really good questions, very nice people that we talked to. We didn't really have much to speak of major concerns and opposition that would have had them show up here today. Eastmont property that has been prior, which is 20 acres that is just adjacent to this property to the east on Yankee Hill. We had, when they were coming forward with their applications, talked to them about sharing access onto 48th Street. If that project were to move forward, I believe that those agreements are in place. We had had discussions. 44th and 48th, you don't see roundabouts. It's not a mistake. And so we did talk about that with Public Works. This is probably, I won't speak for them, but this is probably the end of the standard signalization that you see that's all the way from 27th down to 40th. Here's 48th, maybe one of the last ones that I know roundabouts planned down at 56th Street. I do know that the traffic study did have different warrants and different levels. If I believe 44th is right in the middle of the heart of the commercial, or to ever implement a warrant there for signalization, we would look at those improvements to Yankee Hill. And as part of the ongoing annexation agreement, there is a proposal to improve Yankee Hill to full width, full street improvements. The owner has implied that they wouldn't want to get a major commercial user in there and then close down Yankee Hill for improvements. So if that were to come about, the annexation does outline those improvements and a timing and funding for Yankee Hill to be taken place and triggered by the developer.
So, may I ask you a question?
Yes, I was just going to move to that.
Sorry, Brad, to interrupt you. I apologize. So we're looking at potentially up to 300,000 square feet of commercial here, but the agreement that you had previously, the annexation agreement, and then you're redeveloping it at this point in time. 300,000 potential square footage of commercial here, but nothing in terms of signalized access onto Yankee Hill.
Yankee Hill would likely warrant signalization. So there's basically two triggers. So we believe that about 25% of the trips to the site, if the development were to start building out, so 25% of 300,000 were to be occupied, that it would likely warrant signalization at that time. At 50%, 44th Street would actually warrant dual Fs out, which isn't very common, but we believe that a lot of the circulation will filter into 44th Street.
Okay.
And then there is no warranting that our traffic study says at 48th Street.
At 48th at all? Okay. And so those are built into the annexation agreement?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question. I'm interested in the allowance for, or the future proposed use for commercial sales, car sales. Where would that be?
That's a good question. It actually has a little history to it. The existing use permit that is in this highlighted yellow area was actually the first location that Baxter and the Toyota Lexus dealership that is now in Wilderness Creek was going to propose here. And so we, came through here in 2014 or so with that. And that's where that language actually originated. We have just carried that over because as we've developed this plan and marketed it a little bit, there has been some interest in continuing some additional dealerships down Yankee Hill Road. So that is why it is extended into the PUD language.
And so it would be in the B2 area along like Yankee Hill?
Yes.
Not
It would be,
40th?
yes, it would be just for the commercial, primarily adjacent to Yankee Hill Road.
And multifamily is only on 40th, not along Yankee Hill?
Yeah, right here is the multifamily area, designated about 300 units right now. We would have to come forward with an administrative amendment to show site plan.
And where are you looking for the flexibility of ground floor residential?
I'll be honest, that might have been a little bit of a carryover as well.
Okay.
For the B2. I don't have anything to actually support that or anything right now.
Anything else? Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have testimony in support of this item? Do we have testimony in opposition of this item? Do we have any further staff questions?
No.
Do you want to hear from Brad again?
Yes.
Question?
No.
Okay. Do you have anything you want to say? Okay. I think we're ready to entertain a motion.
Move approval.
Second, Beckius.
Discussion?
And there is a revised.
Yes, there's that's
Absolutely.
correct. Right, that needs to,
So based on the revised staff
Yes.
report.
is that what you were going to point out?
And I'm sorry, who seconded that motion?
Beckius.
Becky?
Okay, thank you.
Maya, you were going to say something?
Yeah, no.
The revised?
Yep,
Okay.
got it.
Then, any other discussion before we vote?
Actually, I would say something. I will support this application. And I would just take the opportunity to be a little contrarian since we've talked about the height waiver and referenced our previous application. I actually disagree that you can expect that people will know that there is a height waiver. I think it's entirely possible that somebody buys a house and moves in and then is shocked and that there's a tall building. So I don't think, while it's preferable to give a height waiver before everything's developed, I actually don't think that should be the deciding factor. I think the deciding factor should be that it makes sense from a density perspective, and there's a demand for this kind of living, and it makes financial sense for the developers. So I would just throw that in there.
That's a good comment.
Mm-hmm.
Other discussion, comments? Okay, I think we're ready to vote.
Okay, this is for conditional approval of changes zone 07060B as indicated in the revised staff report. Beckius?
Yes.
Edgerton?
Yes.
Finnegan?
Yes.
Harris?
Yes.
Hove?
Yes.
Joy?
Yes.
Washington?
Yes.
Core?
Yes.
Shear?
Yes.
Motion carried 9-0.
Jerry, you want to take like a 5-minute break? Is that okay?
Okay, sure.
Okay. Back in 5.
Move.
Okay, we'll continue the meeting again.
Okay.
So we're on to the next item.
Okay, I have 3 associated items. Item 4.6A is change of zone number 18014 from R2 Residential District to R3 Residential District. An associated special permit 18019 for 21 dwelling units with a community unit plan. And I will note that it is final action by the Planning Commission unless appealed to the City Council within 14 days. And then the associated street and alley vacation, number 18002, to vacate approximately 50 by 40 feet of the West B Street right-of-way, all generally located at Southwest 17th and West B Streets. Staff recommendation for the change of zone is approval. Staff recommendation for the special permit is conditional approval, and the street and alley vacation is conformance with the comprehensive plan. Are there any ex parte communications to be disclosed on these items?
I see none. Desi.
Thank you, Commissioners. Desi Redmond, Planning Staff. This is an application for a new community unit plan. To orient you to the site, this is West A Street here and Southwest 17th Street here. So we're talking about the area located at that intersection. So this is a request to include 1 existing single-family home, 6 proposed single-family detached or attached units adjacent to West C Street, and a proposed 14 townhome units adjacent to West B Street, including 1 outlot for open space for drainage and utility easements. As Jerry said, there are 2 associated requests, including a change of zone from R2 to R3 and a vacation for a portion of West B Street. And also, just as a reminder, there was a motion to amend the staff report, specifically the conditions of approval. So, just to point out a few things in the area, there is some similar housing types to the east here. This is the West Park Addition, has some attached townhomes, and there is some other compatible development to the northwest and south with some similar residential units and lot sizes in this area. The applicant is also requesting some waivers. The waiver number 1 is for stormwater detention facilities, and this is really the intent behind that waiver is there is some existing floodplain and wetlands that creep into the site, and so in order to mitigate disturbance of the floodplain, there is a request for stormwater detention. The staff, or Watershed Management, has reviewed that request, and with some modifications with the conditions of approval, it is in support of that request. There's also a waiver for the lot width to depth ratio. These are for the townhome units. Typically, townhome units can't meet that 3-to-1 ratio that is required, so this is a routinely required waiver. The next waiver, number 3, is lot area to a minimum of 2,500 square feet units, again on the townhome units. The developer is, this is a request because of how outlot A is formed based on the drainage requirements, and essentially a lot A wraps around, kind of makes a sidewards U shape here, and because of that shape, the lots in that area can't meet the minimum lot area. The 4th waiver requested is the average lot width to a minimum of 28 feet. The developer is proposing a 28-foot wide townhouse, and so the townhouses are shared with a common wall, and so for a townhouse to be 28 feet in width, the lot would be the same because there's no required side yard setback. That is also a typical request. And the final waiver is the average lot width for a single family. So if these lots up here are developed as single family units, their requirement is for 50 feet. Just to point out, really along the north side of those units, the 50 feet is being, can be met. It's this, along the south side, they're running about 48 or 49.5 or somewhere in there. So it's such a minimal reduction that it is justifiable. And then these are all called at the same time. So just to touch on a little bit more detail for the change of zone. So the change of zone is being requested to go from R2 to R3, basically to allow additional density in the R2. With this size of property, you could get about 17 dwelling units. With the R3, you can get about 21. And then also, the request came in to basically to go around these two existing lots. So staff is recommending that the change of zone include those lots because our zoning ordinance encourages the city to rezone properties within the same block face. However, staff is not recommending those two lots be included in the special permit, so only in the change of zone. And basically that's staying with the zoning patterns that are encouraged through our zoning ordinance. And then the second associated request is the portion of West B Street that is being proposed to be vacated, this portion here. And again, just there's some floodplain in this area, so to reduce disturbance to the floodplain, vacating that portion of West B Street is being requested. You can see it's not currently built. It's not proposed to be built by the city. This development to the east was not required to build West B Street to the west because of the floodplains in the area. And so this, so if it is approved to vacate, it would become part of the CUP boundary. And so with that explanation, I will take any questions you may have.
Would you go back to the houses that are being included?
Sure.
And it looks like there are two lots, is that right? But it looks like you've only circled,
So,
go to your left, or that are being included in the new zoning.
yes, these two lots here, well, all of it is being proposed to be
Okay, that's
included
what-
in the new zoning. The request originally came in to exclude these two
Okay.
properties.
Oh, everything, okay.
So staff is recommending with the change of zone to include all of the properties so it follows the block face.
Okay, I thought you were going across the street, and, because it looks like an ink line or something to me, I don't know. Do you see what we're talking about?
Oh, Dean, I don't.
I think you're talking about the line to the text
Yeah.
box.
Oh,
I think
yeah,
it's an arrow
there it is.
leader.
There.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, you're pointing to the two houses, so I gotcha. I need enlargement here.
Feel free to request anytime.
Thanks.
Other questions?
So are any houses being torn down? Because I know that those two are being rezoned but not included in the permit, but then you've got that one that's kind of south of there. That's gonna stay there as well.
Yes, ma'am.
And then in the staff report, you mentioned something about that's surrendering all redevelopment rights. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Sure, and there has been discussion with the property owner, and they are aware that they are surrendering their development rights. But basically, in order for this area, this boundary to get the density that they wanted to get, they needed to include that property owner. And so there wouldn't be any more units allowed to be built. Say if they did eventually tear that down, only one would be allowed because they've already reached their maximum density.
And is part of that because that house accompanies 6 lots? I mean,
Part of it is because basically they're using the area of that property, which I believe is approximately here, and included in the CUP. And so an area of a R3 CUP only allows so many density or units per acre. It only allows a maximum density. And so if they stay at R3 and they don't increase the CUP boundaries, they couldn't develop that property anymore because the max amount of units are already there.
Could you show me the property line then of that house? Because I don't think I fully understood that. And so if they've lost their redevelopment rights, because they've sold them, or they've just given them away, do their taxes go down? Because now they don't have redevelopment rights, so what's their future use? How does this work with taxation? I realize planning is not the group to ask, but this is they've just given up a right that has value, and so I'm curious what happens to their valuations.
Sure. So to my extent of knowledge on that is rezoning your property doesn't necessarily affect your taxes or how much, your property is going to be in a situation like this, going from R2 to R3. But I don't think that the redevelopment rights would decrease your taxes. I really.
Okay, so they agree to the R3, but they've lost the ability to redevelop the property. So what's the unintended consequences? What might happen to that property if they couldn't use it as housing? Might they come back and ask for commercial waiver? What would they need to do in order to regain some value?
So with the CUP, because it would be existing in the CUP, only residential development would be allowed. So they couldn't come in and ask for a commercial use. It's something like somebody came in and applied for a PUD to the property or something like that. But as far as being in a CUP, they couldn't come in for a commercial use. Now, what possibly could happen is if in 50 years that property owner goes away and somebody else buys that, they would hopefully have done their research that all they can do is put up another single family house. They can't come in and put in 4 more dwelling units. So potentially the unintended consequence is if so much time goes by and that's not communicated to the next property owner, they don't do their research, that could possibly be an unintended consequence.
Is the giveaway written into the deed?
No, because the property isn't being sold or anything, so it's written into
Future right is being diminished. Okay.
Well, if it's part of it would be, I'm assuming it's gonna get a new legal?
Well, the CUP has the legal
So it should
description.
be in the CUP legal.
Right, yes,
Right.
definitely, it would be within the CUP, which would include the legal description of that property.
Okay.
Anything else?
Yeah,
Tracy?
I do have, so I think you kind of already stated this, but this development kind of over here to the east, it's already townhomes. Kind of the reason why they didn't build out to the zoning line is because of that wetland already. And so we can't put like a street in there, and that's kind of why, we're vacating that West B Street is because that's all that floodplain wetlands area. We can't build on that.
Right, and so we, as a general rule, try to preserve our floodplain, our wetlands, and that you can kind of see there, the floodplain, can see it on the aerial, and so that's why that isn't built over that way, and it's just to decrease the disturbance to the wetland and the floodplain.
And we feel okay. I know in the comp plan, we like to have connectivity between neighborhoods or different developments. We feel okay that this is just coming in and basically being like a dead end and not connecting to the north at all.
Well, obviously Southwest 17th Street does connect to the north. Fire also reviewed this, and they didn't have any issues with fire trucks getting through that area. I think if you tried to put a road north or south here, you have these existing residents that are already existing, and so you really couldn't make that additional connection to the West A Street.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, thanks. We'll have testimony from the applicant.
Nate Burnett, Rig Engineering, 601 Old Cheney. Thank you guys for your time. I'll answer a few of these questions that have gotten brought up to Desi. She did a good job explaining the proposed CUP, the change of zone from R2 to R3. Throughout the process of this project, we've met with the neighbors as well as city staff before our client even purchased the property. And so Eric, I'll zoom in here. There's been a lot of discussion here on this particular lot and the rights that they're giving up. So our client purchased the ground from that property owner, and so they're fully aware and have signed, as Desi had mentioned, on the CUP. They have signed and are aware that they're giving up their rights, and so that was kind of all part of the purchase agreement and stuff like that. So one thing that has been brought up here is the wetlands. They were delineated by EA, Science and Technology. You can see that here. Again, on the east, we've talked about the existing West Park. That's a conservation easement on the west side and then further to the north. So that is one of the reasons that we are requesting that the last 50 feet of West B Street be vacated. Again, Desi mentioned we've got a waiver request in for stormwater detention. By the time we looked at how much water, the small increase that was going to occur because of that, we're going to be disturbing a bunch of wetlands. You guys are aware the city's got water quality requirements. It just doesn't make sense to get rid of a natural water quality feature to put in a water quality feature, and so that's why we've requested that waiver. Since then, there is a motion that had come up. There was some concerns from the property owner over here to the east. Met on site with him last week, and we have discussed with Watershed Management and with Marty Aborny, who's the property owner over to the east. We have removed a lot and have expanded the detention. So we met with him last week, reached out to him with emails and phone calls, sent him this proposed plan so that he knows that we've expanded our detention area based on some of his concerns. I should note that as part of this project, we will be paving West B Street, connecting to existing sanitary, extending that in West B, as well as water. To the north, water and sewer available on West C Street. Southwest 17th Street and West C Street are both gravel roads. From the beginning, when we've met with city staff, they said as long as we're not final platting the lots that abut West C Street, we will not need to pave either Southwest 17th or West C Street. So that has been from the beginning when we've met with them before our client even purchased the property, that without final platting those lots, we would not need to pave those streets. With that, I'll open for questions.
Do you have a time frame? Do you have a time frame for when you're thinking you will build out to West C Street? For final plat of those lots to the north?
These lots are already platted, so technically someone could go get a building permit today on those.
So because you're not changing the final plat on those, that's why you don't have to pave that
Correct.
street.
Yep. I should also mention regarding the floodplain and drainage is that a residential lot cannot be have a base flood elevation within that lot. And so all lots will be filled and a LOMAR will be processed before a final plat for the townhomes will be accepted by planning. So hope to get approval today, and then based on after that, we got our grading plan, get grading out to bid, get everything filled, and then we'll have the LOMAR processed while we're finishing the final plat and the EO drawings.
So since you converted that one lot, taking it away from being developable, and
Correct.
putting it into the conservation, that means you're gonna have one less lot than what you had before?
Correct. Instead of 21, we'll have 20.
Okay.
Any other questions for Nate? Thanks, Nate. Do we have testimony in support of this application, or these three items? We'll bunch this together for testimony in support and opposition.
Eric Kenobi, and I am representing the LLC, RKKR, the ownership group. Wanted to introduce myself, working on this kind of fill-in project, worked with the neighbors within the CUP, and as Nate stated, the gentleman giving up his rights, Roger, he is who we've worked with hand in hand, working through the purchase of the project. And I think increasing the density, it'll be good for the city and getting this backfill project going if we can. Here to appreciate the review, and if you guys have any questions for me.
Questions?
I don't know if we received a letter from a neighbor north of this project on C Street, and I don't
Yep.
know if you have any response or to what the neighbor had to say.
I did. I read the letter. I've met with her on site a few times. Are you familiar with? Do you have that map with which home it is? So I believe, if I'm doing this right, I'm a first timer here. So, Lori, right? I believe this was her home right here on the CUP plan. And her concerns were with, I think Nate talked with fire and safety, or maybe Desi did. Her concerns were with some emergency vehicle access, and also an opportunity to get access in and out, which we may have addressed with. It gets really tough to get additional access to West A Street with existing structures in place. I think those were our two biggest concerns.
Yeah, I think her house, she said her address was on C Street, not on Southwest 17th, so.
So, yep, sorry. So then it'd be this home
That
here.
one, all right,
Yep,
thank you.
sorry.
All right.
Other questions? None? Okay, thank you. Other testimony in support? Is there testimony in opposition? Doesn't matter.
My name is Susan Shear, and I live at 1728 West B Street. Couple concerns I have. Number one is West B Street and Southwest 17th and West C Street are gravel. That's no outlet, so it's one way in, one way out. Putting 20 units in would, at my estimate, there's usually 2 cars per unit, that will add 40 cars per day going one in and out on one dirt road. They're talking about paving that part of West B Street. It goes on to a dirt road. They've been grading our road weekly. The city does, because of the traffic that's on it. I'm just concerned that there's a lot of traffic and only one way in and one way out. Not knowing if we need to change the density in that area also.
Questions?
Could someone put up the map for her?
Oh, and I can show you my house.
Yeah. It should pop up in just a second. There you go.
My house is this one right here.
Okay. And so, just so that I'm oriented, those streets where West B and West C, they dead end.
Yes, ours dead ends. There are 4 houses on our street. There's the one on the corner, and then ours, there's another one here and another one there. It just dead ends.
And there's nothing on the other side of West B?
No, it's all trees. The same person that owns this house owns all of that property.
Understood.
We've lived there for 41 years. When we lived there were actually 5 houses in the neighborhood is all. So, any other questions? And the B Street that they're talking about is non-existent. It's his front yard right now.
Got it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other testimony in opposition?
We're both here. We're both old. We got time to sit here and wait for your committees to get over with. Like I said, we've been there 41 years. My name is Burl Shear. I live in the same house. Right there. I think I'm not good with time. A few years back, Habitat for Humanity bought up, I think, a total of 12 houses and put 12 little houses on 50-foot lots. On C Street, if you notice over here, it must be during the day because we've had a few instances where ambulances and support vehicles have not been able to get in and out of there. They all bunch up maybe halfway through the block, and then when it's time for the emergency vehicle to leave with the ambulance or whatever, they're shuffling fire trucks and everything else back and forth there because the roads aren't developed. And if you're not going to do anything with Southwest 17th, widen or anything, it's just going to get that much worse. We do have a problem with West A. I know nobody wants to see more traffic down towards Coddington A because that's a real bottleneck. But this is going to be more traffic. We have within a mile, we have some very large apartment complexes that go down towards the floodplain up on, I'm thinking this side of Southwest 9th Street. So I just I don't think there's any reason to go past R2 zoning. You know, you can now you're the experts, but I believe you can put a duplex on an 80-foot lot. So you could change it to 80-foot lots, you could put several duplexes up there. You wouldn't get the density that they want, but I think you'd get an adequate amount. The 50-foot lots with the small houses, those people can't put a garage up. They can't do much of anything with a property because by the time you get a house in there, you've got enough room on one side for a driveway maybe, and then you've got your 5-foot easement on the other, and you've got the lot full. And like I said, I don't think there's any reason for that to extra and shorten the lot size at all and putting in more housing. I do think there is a problem with West A and Southwest 17th. That is a tough intersection to get in and out of. The city has improved it through the years. When I moved in there, my neighbors and ourselves, we got together and we bought truckloads of rock and did Southwest 17th and B Street mostly because there wasn't any houses on C Street back then. And we've got the road pretty good shape, but it's been getting broke down from all the extra houses now. And we're getting mud holes, ruts and stuff. But when you come onto A Street, it's tough. You got to go up a hill, and if you have a rear-wheel vehicle, when you got to get going because it breaks the traffic during rush hour, you throw rocks on the guy behind you that's waiting behind you. So it's a little tough in there. That's about all I have to say. Is I really don't think we need more dense housing in that area. We've got it around there, and we're filling that neighborhood up pretty fast. I don't think we need to go overboard on it. Thank you.
Questions? Thanks.
Thank you.
Other testimony in opposition? Do you have staff questions?
Yes, please. Okay, I've got a couple for you.
Okay.
So right now, as it's platted, they could put 41 houses in there. Is that right?
I'm not sure of the exact number. I know it's already platted and they're small lots because it was platted so long ago. But I don't know the exact number. And also it's already zoned R2. And so really they could come in for a building permit as it is.
You're correct that their legal description lists 45 lots, but a lot of those lots are 25 feet wide. And part of the zoning ordinance says that when you own 2 lots in common and both of them are undersized, but together they would meet the requirements, then they're considered basically cojoined in terms of the zoning regulations. So you really wouldn't be able to do 45 units because so many of them are undersized lots.
So to be conservative, we could say cut that in half.
In half, yes, and the CUP density is actually even less than that. But yes, with a lot of the 50-foot wide lots, now you would have to at least get B Street improved. They're right, with the current configuration, you could come in and get a building permit on West C. Once it's actually in the CUP and the lots now have been revised, if they come in to final plat the lots along West C Street, they're actually going to have West C improved. So their first phase is just to do West B, because West C would require paving then.
And I know this says it in the staff report, but I can't find it right away. Going from R2 to R3 would only be an increase of like 3 units.
Right, from 17 to 21 units.
And so, kind of going back to this paving issue, and Steve might have to come back up because I don't know if you're going to know this history thing, but why weren't these paved when this stuff was originally platted? You know, like West B Street, West C Street. I mean, I know that part of West C Street isn't developed yet, but why didn't that paving happen at that time?
I can take a stab at that, but probably because those regulations weren't in our codes that they would have to be. There could be some history as maybe they weren't even in the city limits. I mean, who knows how far back that could go. But without doing that research, I couldn't answer specifically.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions? Okay, I don't see any. Thanks. Do we have applicant rebuttal? Nate?
So yes, currently we could build 17 on R2. We have the existing residence, Roger, so that takes it, from what we're proposing, we've got 21, so that takes him down, so we are 20. Now we removed a lot, so now we're actually down to 19, so we're only proposing 19 new units where we could just go out and get a building permit today for 17. I will note that we are not planning on final platting West C. So Steve mentioned a second phase up on West C. We're not going to bring forth a final plat on those lots.
So really, you don't have a phase 1 and a phase 2 because you don't plan on doing a phase 2 at this point?
Well, there really is no phase 2 because those are already platted, and Eric can go get a building permit tomorrow if he wanted. So really, we're just concerned about, let's do this. We're just concerned about this area here. That's our project.
Nate, you're saying the West Sea properties are already final platted?
Correct.
So, and this is gonna be a staff question, and I'm sorry, but, so if someone put in, a proposal to build a house or, a dwelling unit on West C Street, would that trigger the paving of that right now?
No.
Because it's already been final platted, and it was final platted at a time when
Correct.
those rules didn't exist or something.
Right. So here's the grading plan of the CUP, so you can see
Yes.
these lots are very small. They're 25 feet. And so like Steve had mentioned, you can't physically build a house on a 25-foot lot unless, I guess, you had a little container home. But so we're proposing as part of the CUP 6 attached or dwelling units there on the north, but because those would be common ownership, you could build over the property line and not have to replat.
So the only avenue for, and I'm sorry, because I know you're not really staff, the only avenue for these people to get this street paved would be due to a paving district at this point.
Correct.
Steve Henderson at the Planning Department. I do need to clarify, that's not correct. Those 6 lots are shown in the CUP.
Yeah.
So when the final plat comes in, you're going to have to plat those lots in conformance with the CUP or plat them in an outlot for future development. You will not be allowed to leave them as a whole bunch of single individual lots because that's not in conformance with your CUP. Your CUP is showing them as 6 lots. They're either going to need to be platted as an outlots, making them unbuildable, that you could later come back and final plat into the 6 lots. But when you final plat them into the 6 lots, that will then require the paving of the adjacent street because that is part of the subdivision ordinance. So you would have to do West C, and you would also have to address the paving of Southwest 17th Street, at least as it is adjacent to the final plat. So when you come in to final plat the lots along West B, you're going to have to address the lots along West C, either putting them in an outlot or platting them as they're shown on the CUP. Once you include them in the CUP, you then need to final plat them per the CUP.
So is that stated in the conditions of approval for that to be?
That is just partly simply as being a part of the CUP, you are agreeing to final plat them as per the CUP. And so you are showing them as 6 lots, you are showing them no longer in their current configuration. They need to be in the configuration shown in your CUP. That is simply the rules of the CUP that you will final plat them as you have proposed them in the CUP.
Are you okay with us moving ahead with, if this information is a surprise?
Yeah, I think we would have to talk with Eric regarding that, because that is a surprise.
Would you guys be open to a deferral?
Do you want to defer, or how do you want to proceed? We want to accommodate what you want to do here.
Yeah, we're going to have to defer then.
Okay. Okay, so let's, we need to entertain a motion to defer.
Move to defer, and I would propose just a new information only,
Okay.
if that's
And
acceptable.
2 weeks? Is that what you're talking about?
2
As
weeks.
long
Is that
as
enough?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. You want to discuss that motion?
I'm
I
very
think-
happy to
Yeah.
work with the applicant with this, in light of this new
Yeah,
new
it's the
information.
right thing to do here.
Yeah, I'm glad the information came out.
Yep.
And I trust the staff will work closely so that all information that they need to have is in front of them.
Yep. Okay, let's vote.
Okay, this is for a 2-week deferral of change of zone 18014, special permit 18019, and street and alley vacation 18002. Beckius?
Yes.
Edgerton?
Yes.
Finnegan?
Yes.
Harris?
Yes.
Hove?
Yes.
Joy?
Yes.
Washington?
Yes.
Core?
Yes.
Shear.
Yes.
Motion carried 9-0.
Okay, at this time, anyone wishing to speak on an item not on the agenda may do so. If not, we are adjourned.
I think he's coming up.
Steve would like,
All of them?
pardon me?